No one is born as a leader. You also need to be adaptive from time to time. I felt a certain, I would not call it pressure, but a push in a positive way. This is what you can learn from sports a little bit. It's not always a success story.
Welcome to Banking on Success, the podcast in which senior leaders share their insights about leadership, transition, and the future of finance across CEE and beyond. I'm pleased to have as my co-host today again, Gunther Däuber, Chief Economist and Head of Raiffeisen Research. Welcome, Gunther. Thanks for joining. And both of us are extremely pleased to have as a guest in our today's podcast, Rainer Schnabl, Corporate and Investment Banking Board Member for Products and Solutions since 1st of March this year. Welcome, Rainer. Thank you for accommodating us in your schedule. Before we deep dive into your leadership thoughts and also hearing your perspectives about CEE, let me shortly introduce you to our audience. Rainer is since more than 3 decades in the Raiffeisen Group, recently CEO of Raiffeisen Bosnia, and has gained many different perspectives in working in different units and many different activities. So this leads me already to my first question, Rainer. Would you take us back and share and guide us through your journey till today?
Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for having me today. It's a real privilege to be part of this podcast series that I already follow somehow since the very beginning. So that's a privilege, I have to admit. Yeah. What is my story? So 29 years ago, I started actually after the university in the consulting industry and with one of the big fives at that time. Now it's big fours, I think. And 27 years ago, then I decided to start in banking and I joined Raiffeisen Group. And when we talk about Raiffeisen Group, and you perfectly mentioned it already, it's a variety of different angles how we can look at this group. It's different institutions, different countries. And I started at that time at Raiffeisen Landesbank Upper Austria, which is based in Linz. It's one of the biggest shareholders of Raiffeisen Bank International, and there I started my banking career, starting in the private equity structured finance part, having some experience then on the retail side, leading the retail operations there. In 2014, then I decided to take over the asset management part of RBI Group, or Raiffeisen Group actually. It's Raiffeisen Capital Management, where I gained a deep insight into the asset management industry, which is, I have to admit, very interesting, very innovative, and very much also customer demand and need driven. Yeah, and in 2022, then a very important step for me, I have to admit, taking over the responsibility as a CEO in Raiffeisen Bosnia and Herzegovina, based in Sarajevo. And yeah, since 1st of March, as you mentioned, I have the pleasure to serve as a board member for corporate and investment banking on the products and solutions side here in RBI, hopefully bringing in all my experience that I gained so far since 1999, because since 1999, I work in banking somehow.
Thanks for that. And this brings me already, I'll come back to what you just mentioned a bit later, but now interested to understand through all these different stations, what were the moments which gave a stamp, so to say, on your leadership style? What shaped you as a leader? And then subsequent question, what are the skills which one needs to have if this person wants to go to the top?
I have to admit, I think there is not that one moment or these moments. I think there are a lot of moments actually, that you experience in such a period of time. You do not start as a leader for sure. You start as someone who is working on different topics in a team, who is trying to engage properly, and then I think you gain a lot of experience. And for me, it was much more important not to see how others do their leadership, but to a certain extent, I had some kind of experiences with leadership where I told to myself, this is how you should not behave if you then once really become a leader or have to take over, or you can take over a leadership function. And I think that was for me even much more important. So I would say unrespectful behavior, being loud, crying, not being prepared sometimes as a leader when you talk to your team. So these were the topics that shaped me a little bit. And this is what I took then for myself, saying, well, if I really have the chance to become a leader, I would really try, I want to avoid this kind of behavior. So that's I would say, my story when it comes to leadership. And coming back to your question, what should you have to be a good leader, whatever a good leader is, I have to admit. So that's
a separate discussion.
That's a separate discussion. But to some extent, if you really start your journey, I think it's always a certain dedication, ambition, being able among a group to speak up, to have an opinion, to contribute. I think if you have these kind of skills, and if you can contribute in a constructive way in discussion on different topics, I think this already shows then looking forward that you maybe might have some leadership skills, because I have to admit no one is born as a leader. And if you have this kind of ability maybe to use the skill set that you have, and then also to be willing to use it, I think then you can consider to become a leader or to take over a leadership function.
And what is a good leader, Rainer? I needed to take over now on the question you ask yourself.
A good leader for me, and I sometimes ask this even myself. So how did I behave this week in my leadership role? Have I been a good leader, or rather a not so good leader? And what I always try to do, and this is my guiding principle when it comes to leadership, I really try to treat everyone in the same way how I want to be treated. And I think if you have this kind of respect, no matter on which kind of level you are in an organization or in an HR team setup, whatever, I think that's then a very important first step to be a good leader, and also to respect opinions that other colleagues are having, to take them and also to consider them. And for me, then, being a good leader actually also means that you are able to reconsider your decision that you might already have taken in your head, and then say, wow, but I was not expecting this kind of input. If I take that in my consideration, then the decision looks differently. So this I think is good leadership to some extent for me. Also being able to listen and to bring in the views and arguments of colleagues.
And this is very interesting what you say. Thank you for that, because it's a rarity indeed that top leaders are listening and also ready to revise opinion. Usually one may expect that there is this leadership opinion and we need to follow. So thank you for that. And let us switch gears to the market perspective. So Gunther.
Maybe very briefly, as a leader, is it different to lead in Austria than in CEE or the Western Balkans, where you spend significant time?
I'm quite sure, yes, it is, because I think you wherever you take over a leadership function, you maybe have different skill sets for sure in your team. You have different capabilities. You have different maturity maybe of markets, and this is why I learned during my time as a leader or having a leadership function that you also need to be adaptive from time to time. So I think I see it now quite obvious. The leadership role that I have now on corporate and investment banking side here in Vienna on group board level is a different one than the leadership function that I had in Raiffeisen Capital Management or in Raiffeisen Bank Bosnia and Herzegovina. For sure, it's also the people are used cultural-wise maybe also to different styles of leadership, and it takes some time also for the colleagues then to adapt to maybe your way of trying to be a good leader, and they also need to get known to you, and you need to get known to them, and this is how you then maybe create a new leadership style. But for sure, it's different. It's cultural topics, different impacts. I have to admit.
And may I ask what has motivated you to venture into the region, and more importantly, with your impressions, how you would describe the region from a business perspective, now the Western Balkans?
What motivated me? That's actually this I always ask myself sometimes. So from time to time, because I would say I come from a regional banking setup, which is Raiffeisen Bank Upper Austria, also having some kind of international experience, but not comparable to this doing banking really in different markets in a very specific region. And then joining Raiffeisen Capital Management, I gained for the first time experience via these local asset management companies that we run in our network banks with the international banking market, and in our case, very specifically on the Central and Eastern Europe side and the Southeastern and Europe side. And then what comes also during my entire career, I have a cycle I would call a 6 to 8 year cycle of changing roles and changing functions and jobs. And then after, I would say, 6-7 years at Raiffeisen Capital Management, I felt a certain, I would not call it pressure, but a push in a positive way, a certain push to maybe go to one of these countries. So then this was then Bosnia. This one was in that time not clear. So I also applied for different functions in our network. So for board functions, primarily in network banks. I was not chosen for several board positions, I have to admit. But then all of a sudden, Bosnia turned out to be an option, and I took it immediately after, for sure, talking a little bit, let's say, to my family. But this was also not very long lasting. And I have to admit, if you change a job or if you get a job opportunity, at least in my case, it is like that, you feel in the very first second if you want to take this over, yes or no. If you need to find arguments why you should do it or why you should not do it, I think then it's better to leave it aside. And when I can still remember who called me in that time and simply saying, yes, Bosnia, and I was in that second. I was, wow, yes, for sure, I will do it. I think that's also at jobs that I took. It was always a little bit like that. So it was a very emotional part. Yeah.
So it seems you went with a certain dedication there. So how would you then, let me say, describe the region in a little bit more analytical way? Because there is still sometimes a notion of backwardness, in at least parts of Western Europe when we talk about Western Balkans, but Central Eastern Europe as a whole. Yeah. So what do people maybe misunderstand also about the region and our markets there? You have been there locally. What is your notion here?
I would say still people from the Western European sphere, or maybe also other regions in the world, are having a certain perception when it comes to Central Eastern Europe and especially then Southeastern Europe. And this perception to some extent does not fit to the reality that you then face there. So if you see CEE markets and you look at Czechia, Slovakia, Hungary, these are already markets who are quite nicely developed. Romania, if you see what kind of business potential is there, if you see how the economy was growing over the last years, although on the Western European side, it was we were suffering a little bit. And although these economies are so closely connected, we had nice GDP growth in the CE area and also SEE area. And I would say in the Southeastern Europe area, it's maybe then even a little bit tougher, because still people are having a certain view on that region. That's driven a little bit by history, for sure. It's not so long ago that also this region went through some tough times.
It's kind of a stigma.
And that's still a little bit in the head of a lot of people, I have to admit, because if you are today, around 50, then for sure in that time when this kind of tough situation happened there, you were 20 or something, 15 to 25, whatever. And you still have that in your mind. This was part of your daily life to some extent. You maybe have even seen a lot of, personal related stories, people moving from former Yugoslavia to Austria, Germany. So you had maybe even someone in your school class having neighbors and so on and so forth. So this is why I have to admit we have a certain perception of that. And looking how that region developed over the last years. And now I start from the north going to the south. If you see Slovenia, if you see Croatia, if you now see Serbia, that this is what is going on there. Looking at some of the also economic topics that are happening there. If you see investors from outside coming into these countries, trying to develop things, trying to move things forward, this is making me super confident. And for sure, you have still a certain gap between these countries that I named now and then maybe other countries. But I do not believe that some of these countries will stay an island and nothing is going to develop there. And around these countries, things are developing properly. This will not happen. And if I now see on the European Union path that we have maybe one or two countries of this Balkan region maybe joining European Union, not potentially in 10, 15 years, but potentially in 2, 3 years. So Montenegro and Albania, and they are having a clear also political will to join this European Union, then I'm quite confident for that region. And I still believe that if one of these countries achieves to join the European Union in that region, in this Western Balkan region, this can even maybe have a very positive impact also on the ambitions of the other countries to join the European Union setup.
So thanks, Rainer, for your insights, and maybe a little bit forward-looking. Where do you see the most interesting momentum currently in our markets, and maybe also in neighboring regions, and specifically where you would see the region and RBI's role in a few years from now?
So I have to admit, maybe sometimes at RBI we are underestimating a little bit the footprint that we have in that region, and that this footprint is a very special one. I learned that now also during my first months here in RBI, going to some markets beyond our core region, so which I don't know, this I would say STAN countries, being to Uzbekistan, seeing how much or how intensively our services are needed there. So for sure, we are not doing the lending business, but developing the capital markets, being a bridge for investors from the United States, from the United Kingdom, from the European countries to invest there into government bonds. Or being to China some weeks ago, seeing how intensively our services are of value for Chinese customers being active in the region, not just selling their goods, also building up companies, building up production premises, investing in renewable energy in our core region. And here we are of huge value. Because what we can offer is in that highly complex and, let's say, rather small setup that we have here country-wise. So I don't know, countries with people living there, which is in Chinese terms a district of a city. Here we can be of huge value because we manage the complexity for them. And this I learned over the last months. And here I have to admit we have maybe much more value than we currently think. So that's something we can be proud of already, and we should even improve.
I'll catch up on that. But first, because I think you made already almost the first 100 days as a CIB board member in RBI. And I felt you're always passionate about your activity in Bosnia and the region in general. So was there any difficulty in just switching from a subsidiary to head office?
I would not call it a difficulty, but it's a different, for sure, it's a different kind of responsibility, and it's on a different level. And if you serve in a network bank, for sure, you are maybe much closer to what we call the real customer business. You are on the ground. You have maybe one country and one macro economy that you have to follow, and on level of the group management board, it's then for sure a little bit different because it's you get a much broader perspective. For me, it was not so tough, but I'm with the group now already since years, so this is why not everything is new for me. I can imagine if someone is coming in new,
Entirely from outside would be...
that's maybe a different story. But I think that's also the strength of the Raiffeisen organization, that we can offer that even if you stay with more or less the same group, and now I just say Raiffeisen, you can do many different jobs in many different countries, in many responsibilities that the group is offering. So there is even, I have to admit, for me, that never came to my mind that I somehow have to go to some other institution or whatever, because Raiffeisen always offered something, or is giving you the opportunity to do something else.
Did you have this famous kind of 100 days, any focus points where you thought these are the first things to do? And subsequent question, what is the focus for the next month?
So the focus, let's say, what is always driving me, and that's, I cannot say this is 100 days or after 100 days. What is always driving me is how can we be of value for our customers and for our either directly, so customers that we serve here out of the head office in Vienna, and also indirectly, so being of value of customers who are customers of our network banks locally in the regions, and being responsible for the entire product range that we offer. I have to admit that's maybe the main driver, where customers feel, is it getting easier to bank with us? Is it getting more complicated? Are we having a state-of-the-art technology in place? How fast are we in taking decisions? And this does not always mean that we say yes to everything, but I think it's also important, if you are maybe not able to cover the one or the other topic that the customer is asking for, you also have to be fast in saying, let's say at that time, you cannot count on us, but next time please show up again. So fast does not always mean taking a decision, does not always mean a yes, but I think you need to be somehow predictable also as a bank by the customers. So you cannot have a decision cycle which goes up and down, and you're not really predictable, because then the customers will no longer approach you. And I think this, throughout all our product ranges, together with the coverage areas of our bank, I think that's one of the most important topic that we should have in mind looking forward, that making it easier for the customer, being faster in the decision-making process, and having also some appetite, especially on the regions we are working in. Yeah. These are the main topics I will look at for sure.
You briefly touched upon this increasing level of complexity in the group function. So what helps you to stay connected? What, let me say, actually happens in the markets, in our region? How do you manage that one?
So I think this is maybe the benefit, having someone who served in a country, having there a CEO role, no matter if the network bank is big or small. But to some extent, what I realized, if you want to assess a certain market, if you want to assess the banking competition there, if you want to assess how our customers are operating there on the ground, corporate customers, institutional customers, then you need to be there, and you need to talk to them, and you need to get in touch also with the local institutions. I'm not the biggest fan of taking decisions just based on desktop research, and then maybe living in the wrong belief that you know everything. So I think it's very important to combine both things. For sure, you have desktop research, but I would say in our case, in the region where we are operating in, it's even more important also being on the ground, not just talking to our colleagues there, because that's maybe not enough, but also extending that, talking to supranationals, talking to the regulators. So I learned very intensively during my time in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the regulator is having a crucial function. You need to really have a proper relationship to the regulator. This does in many aspects, in exchanging on different topics, and also having impact then on the one or the other topic if they work on specific things. So The regulator in banking is I would say one of the most important topics, and this is what I also try to manage now in my role. I think it's not most important to sit here in Vienna and then to wait until someone is reporting something to you. That's not my understanding of having a group board function. My understanding of having a group board function is to go there and not to be visited.
I cannot agree more, being on the coverage side. Yeah? So at the end, our salaries are paid by the clients. Would you like to add something, or may I chip in with a question?
Go ahead.
From your perspectives, what are the biggest risks which clients nowadays and looking forward need to consider, and where we as a bank can be supportive?
Yeah, I think looking back a little bit and over the last years, and here maybe Gunther is even more.
I'm sure he will chip in with another question right after.
More educated to talk about that, but from my perspective now, being on the business side since years, I would say since 2020, 2021, we are having, as I would say, we are used to some crisis topics, So it started with the COVID or Corona topic. Then we had the war in Ukraine. Then now we have the Iran, Israel, United States in the conflict. And all of that for sure is influencing our customers, and some more, some less. So for sure, what we know is that this resources topic, the supply chain, is a tough cookie, and maybe also on the market side, where do you sell your products? That's influencing our customers. But on the other hand, all of these crises that we have already seen is and that's sometimes tough to handle. But on the other hand, there are also opportunities coming up, and especially I would say for some countries where we are actively banking in, we have some kind of opportunities looking forward there. European companies are considering nearshoring, so this is for sure. Where the Balkan countries and some CE countries are benefiting, and I think this is how you need to see this kind of crises that we are currently in. That each and every crisis is also offering opportunity, and we know that the situation that we currently face in Ukraine, also that very tough cookie from today's perspective. Hopefully, looking forward, we can contribute as a banking group also in the rebuilding of Ukraine and of the country and of the infrastructure there, and this is how I see it. That we hopefully deliver then a value to a country, to a corporate customer, to an FI customer, whatever.
Yeah, given all this level of complexity you mentioned, where do you see then opportunities to improve or evolve our product offering, to manage this complexity in terms of the client perspective?
I think currently what we really have to consider even a little bit more than we currently do is the impact of this technology shift that we currently see on our product offering. It's not just artificial intelligence. I think it's one part. I also talk about the blockchain technology, tokenization. I think on a lot of our topics, this could become a very interesting technology. On some areas, we already see the one or the other pilot that other banks did, that this could be very helpful for our customers doing business with that kind of technology. And for sure, this will not cover everything that we offer, especially when it comes to business with corporate customers and FI customers. You always need to have this personal relationship. We see a lot of customers where we, for example, are doing the transaction banking business with them. It's not simply that I plug and play and the solution is implemented and then everything works properly. It takes some time to get that done and to make it then running properly. This is why I deeply believe in this kind of human and technology-driven service approach. Let's put it like that, because whatever we have on technology side, it also needs to be implemented. It needs to fit to the databases that the customer is having, and so on and so forth. So this is why I'm also quite confident for our businesses here. And this is what we try to do. So this kind of technology-driven assisted products.
You bring me now to another question. I mean, previously we've been comparing ourselves to Western peers. We see increasingly uprising local regional champions in our region of footprint as well. And in the context of what you've just mentioned with technology and deployment of AI in the banking processes, which would lead to kind of commoditizing of all possible things. Where do you see it essential, or how will the group differentiate itself in future from competitors? So where is the essential to look at?
I think you are fully right. So this in the future, things will maybe become a commodity. So it's no longer maybe then restricted that banks are doing the lending business. So more or less the entire finance industry can then buy the one or the other token of projects.
It's not just
of
the
lending.
monopoly of a
It's
bank.
not the monopoly of the banks anymore. So at least this is my view, and this is why we as a bank need to invest also in our capabilities to be able to, or much more than today, to structure financing products, to go into the origination, to set up the blockchain for potential investors, then to be able to safekeep for our investors the tokens. I think that's it. What in future will play an important role, and this is where we try to develop into. I have to admit, and I think it's quite visible what happened on retail side already. On retail side, some years ago, no one was expecting this neobanks and neo brokers coming up. So everything was fine, and then all of a sudden it goes super fast, and you have these new competitors in, and then it's if you are then not ready, then it's super tough to compete with them.
So you manage the competitive landscape in the retail banking. About the wholesale banking, what are the key innovation trends you are seeing related to technology and beyond that, or where you would be investing in, so to speak, on the wholesale side?
I would, in the wholesale side, invest in technology. I have to admit, I think that's the main, the key driver looking forward. Being it on the transaction banking side, being it on the investment banking side. I think this the way how we run it today will look differently in. It's tough to say, but I think 5 years down the road, it will already look different. So this is why I would invest into that, and I think here also the change will come from. So this blockchain technology, tokenization, this will be one part, and the second part then in combination with artificial intelligence on a lot of topics. If I see what we currently consider in our trade finance capabilities, how to use artificial intelligence to be even faster in our way how we communicate with our customers, and also in a way how we then can detect maybe fraudulent activities, in a way how we do no longer have to do things manually then in the process chain, so that we really use these end-to-end processes, AI assisted. I have to admit that's something where we can then differentiate, because you are faster, you are easier how you appear to your customer and client, and there is no paperwork anymore, And you avoid certain topics that you still have today. In the transaction banking, I don't know, if you send money from Japan to Europe, you need certain steps, that
and at the same time, the clients expect to be instant.
Exactly, and that might look differently than in some years.
Yeah. Switching gears at the end of our conversation, how do you take decisions? How do you deal with setbacks? And how do you re-energize?
So how taking decisions? I think if I look at myself, you always have different layers. For sure, you by yourself, you have a certain, for yourself, you take a decision on something. Before you even go into a discussion, you have a certain
Opinion.
pre-decision taken, let's put it like that, or you can call it opinion. And what I then really try to do a lot is to bring in all the different arguments, but not from everyone. So I think there's also no need to have always a basic democratic decision-making process, but from the people who are really affected and who are relevant in a specific topic. Because otherwise you engage your entire team on everything, and this is also sometimes, that's also not helpful. So you need to focus on these colleagues who can really contribute, and then you can derive your decision much better. And I think then for me it's important if we then take a decision, and that's and I outlined it already. There is no need that it's my pre-opinion, that the pre-decision that I have already taken. Then you need to be transparent on why. And maybe sometimes not everyone is having, it's always the perspective that you have. So, and you need to be able to explain that. And you need to be able to convince people and also to buy into that decision and to go for it. Although it's maybe not the decision that someone would have taken by him or herself. And I think that's also the strength if you decide a little bit in a team setup, because you get these different perspectives in, that you normally cannot cover. You cannot cover everything by yourself. This is how I try to run it.
The second one was how you deal with setbacks.
What is a setback?
Touché. How do you re-energize? What helps you gaining, the...
I was asking the setback because in each and every setback, sometimes, for sure, everyone is having setbacks, but sometimes if I then consider or let's say think about the one or the other setback, it's rather, wow, it's good that it happened in that way and not differently, because it's, I always see the glass more or less half full and not half empty. So I think in each and every decision, which is maybe also not going into your direction, you can see some positive things. And looking at my personal career and life, it could have happened that all of a sudden they would have chosen me already for some other function, then I would never had the chance to take over the responsibility in Bosnia. So, I think it's always two sides of the coins, and I very much believe things happen not by coincidence. So there is a certain guiding principle behind. Yeah, and how I re-energize, it's actually I re-energize also by talking to our people in the network banks. I re-energize by meeting customers. So since March, I think I did not have one evening where I was not on the road to some extent, meeting people, meeting partners, meeting customers, meeting network banks, being in the countries, being maybe also in regions which are a little bit far away. Yeah, and this is also somehow re-energizing. Yeah, and from time to time I try to do some sports, which is then also clearing the mind a little bit. Yeah.
So this brings me to a, let me say, personal moment. Yeah, we had a nice run together in Bosnia when I was on a business trip over there. So you're a fairly sporty person. So what does sports mean to you in terms of maintaining, as you mentioned, your inner balance, but maybe also you have some parallels to leadership or business, and maybe you can give some insights how sporty you are.
First, Gunther, I can very well remember our run that we had in the very early morning. So it was, for me, it was tough. Gunther was already fully in shape along the Miljacka in Sarajevo, so where we did it. And for me, sports to some extent, and if you not just do it for getting some fresh energy, if you then also try to compete on the one or the other event, so from time to time, it brings you a little bit to your limits, So it's and you need to manage your resources quite well. So to be able to finish such an event, a long run, or let's say a triathlon or whatever, you need to manage your resources. If you give everything in the first hour, then for sure you will not be able to cross the finish line. And this is the interesting thing in sports. And sometimes, for whatever reason, that your body, your constitution on that specific day is not able to deliver. And I think this is what I also learned in business sometimes. there are days when you have the one or the other topic on the table, even with your team, you have a discussion and you see, wow, today
It's not moving.
it's not moving. It's not moving. And then it's much better to give up and say, we meet again in 2 days. And all of a sudden, in 2 days, things are moving. And this is what you can learn from sports a little bit. It's not always a success story. If you try to be a sportsman who is then also a little bit competitive, you have a lot of setbacks, But then there is this one moment all of a sudden where it pays off. But it's from each and every setback, I have to admit, you learn, because either you have not prepared yourself properly, I don't know, the nutrition that you took before the event was not the proper one. So there are a lot of
So every setback is a lesson or
Exactly.
an opportunity.
Thanks for sharing these insights. And I think you're a very modest person, because I think if I try to find some results from you, I think the triathlon results and all these things, and I would say with very, very decent numbers.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Rainer, for joining us, for sharing all these very nice insights about how you think on leadership, about our region, actually the larger Eastern European region, because you've been traveling a lot, and these personal notes. And dear audience, thanks for tuning in today, and stay on board for the next episode of Banking on Success. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Raiffeisen Bank International. Make it happen.